The surprising reason why 2016's Ben-Hur isn't gay. Screenwriter Keith Clark reveals why the famous homoerotic subtext is gone. Despite positive reviews, including one from this site, there's a small storm of controversy brewing around 2016's update of the classic story Ben-Hur. Why has Hollywood put Ben-Hur back in the closet? A Guardian headline asks, noting that any of the homoerotic undertones present in the 1959 version of the film are absent in this version. To hear screenwriter Keith Clark tell it, the reason may be more technical than you'd expect. Clark was inspired to write his own version of Ben-Hur after watching the 1959 classic with his wife and ruminating on the theme of forgiveness. Clark, who previously wrote the screenplay for 2010's The Way Back, then picked up the original 1880 Lew Wallace book Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. And this is where the question of adaptation and rebooting gets complicated. When asked if his version was an adaptation or reinterpretation of the book, rather than the 1959 film, Clark explained, "That's very accurate, and there's a reason for that. Warner Brothers own the old MGM library, and so I can't do a remake of that, because Warner Brothers owns that. I had to go back to the source material, so anything that's in the 59 version that is not in the book I could not use." That's one of the reasons why, for example, Toby Kebbell's Messala doesn't die in the arms of Jack Huston's Ben-Hur at the end of the famous chariot race. That death, so famous from the 1959 film, was not in the book, and therefore off limits to Clark. So it's important to remember, when re-examining the gay legacy of Ben-Hur, that if ever there were homoerotic tensions between Messala and his childhood friend, Judah Ben-Hur, they were the invention of Gore Vidal, one of the many screenwriters on the 1959 Ben-Hur. In an unforgettable section of the 1995 documentary The Celluloid Closet, Vidal claims he rewrote part of the 1959 film to heavily imply that Charlton Heston's title character and his childhood friend, and later betrayer, Messala, Stephen Boyd, were more than just friends growing up. Crucially, according to Vidal, Boyd was let in on this subtext and Heston, a staunch conservative, was not. Vidal's story, while enormously entertaining, has been hotly contested. Director William Wyler said he couldn't recall having this kind of discussion with either Vidal or Boyd, while Heston, as you might expect, wrote a blistering response in the Los Angeles Times staunchly denying Vidal's story. Just this week, actress Roma Downey, a producer of the 2016 Ben-Hur and several other faith-based projects, said of the alleged Ben-Hur/Messala romance, "I don't even know if that was true in that film." But Clark thinks the truth of Vidal's story is unassailable. "I'm very familiar with that, which I think is great," he told Vanity Fair. "How can you not watch the 59 version, and hear Gore Vidal say what he said, and then look at the hugging, and the way Messala in that movie just looked at Judah? It's like, yes, there was something else going on other than, hey, buddy, I'm back from the war. But there's none of that in this version. Instead, Judah is in love with his servant, Esther. Messala is in love with Judah's sister," Clark says firmly. Vidal says he created the homoerotic plot in order to make Messala's hatred for Judah seem more believable. But instead of the fire of a spurned lover, Kebbell's Messala is driven by familial animosity. In this version, Vidal's would-be ex-lovers are now adopted brothers. That not only makes the idea of romance a non-starter, but also ties into Clark's vision of a story of forgiveness. It's brothers fighting brothers. I just figured that the closer they are, the greater the betrayal. If you extrapolate that out to the next level, you have the greater the betrayal, the greater the sin. The greater the sin, the greater the forgiveness has to be for him to actually end up forgiving his brother. According to Kebbell, gay rights has advanced so much that the notion of homoerotic subtext isn't something we need in film now. In 1959, the gay context was very important, he said at the Ben-Hur premiere. They need a voice. You shouldn't have to hide in the dark about something you feel and you're grown with. That was their own thing they wanted to portray and we didn't need to. It's a different time, thankfully. But while we certainly are living in a different time than 1959, gay relationships are still largely absent from big blockbuster movies. In fact, this year's big summer films were full of characters who were almost or vaguely gay, but we've still yet to see explicitly gay characters at the center of a big-budget spectacle film despite very vocal demands from advocacy groups like GLAAD. But perhaps Ben-Hur, which, remember, carries the subtitle A Tale of the Christ, was never going to be the film to give us that. Jesus himself plays a fairly significant role in both the original book and this 2016 adaptation. In the 1959 version, Christ was played by a fairly unknown opera singer, Claude Heater, who didn't get his name in the credits and never shows his face on screen. The Coen brothers spoofed that hands-off approach to the Messiah in this year's Hail Caesar. But in Clark's version, the Christ is played by Brazilian actor Rodrigo Santoro, 300, Love Actually, whose face is all over the movie. For me, he was always an important figure in the book, Clark said. I'm okay not to shy away from that. In my original draft, he was in it more. And while Clark said he was hoping to write a story that would appeal to more than just a Christian audience, he says the film was screened early for faith-based focus groups. The involvement of Downey and her husband, producing partner Mark Burnett, also means that the studio, at least, wanted to pitch the project to the potentially lucrative and crucially organized block of religious moviegoers. I think that the faith-based audience is going to get what they want from it and we don't hide that, Clark said. But I would like people to walk away and say, wow, this is a big spectacle, a lot of action, wonderful performances. It's got a contemporary context. I think that's what a secular audience will walk away with. And given the positive reception, it may be that this Ben-Hur, stripped of any potentially controversial gay subtext, and given a happier ending than either the book or the 1959 version, will pull in a larger audiences. But something tells me Gore Vidal might not approve.